what are all these governments do? They're moving power and centralizing it, and then you lose what? Individual liberty. So that's the problem with communism, socialism, fascism. So he talks about fascism too, that's why I brought it up. So the Soviet Union had overproduction of unwanted items, they didn't know how to manage it. So there's other historical examples. East Germany, he goes into a little bit. They had consumer goods shortages. So what does Hayek say? The knowledge needed for economic decisions is dispersed across individuals and only revealed how? Through market interactions. We got to have a market for you to have more freedom. No planner, however competent, can do that. They cannot replicate the spontaneous order of markets, he calls it. What does socialism's attempt do? It results in waste and economic stagnation, he says. So Venezuela, you can take a little look at Venezuela. Maybe we'll come back and do a whole video on Venezuela and what happened there. But they had hyperinflation, they had empty shelves, and it was a big problem. And the state controlled oil and food distribution, and they ignored the market. So East Germany had a problem. 3, inevitability of coercion. So he talks about this. You can't do it without coercion. To implement a socialist plan, and what does that do? That takes away from your freedom. If you're coerced into doing things, you don't have freedom anymore. The state must use coercion to ensure compliance. You remember hearing that word, comply, as individuals naturally resist having their preferences overridden, right? You want to get what you want at the store. You want to do what you want. You want to choose the job. Hayek argued that socialism cannot function without suppressing dissent. And you saw around these communist countries what happens to free speech under communism, what happens to free speech under Marxism, what happens to free speech. Well, you've seen it, right? You saw it. Mao's China, free speech problem. Stalin's Russia, free speech problem. So you want to be able to express yourself. It's not great for free speech either. And remember during COVID how they were shutting down narratives. So a single economic plan cannot accommodate everyone's desires, right? That's simple. Individuals, groups, workers, farmers resist by refusing to follow what? Quotas. Do you want to follow quotas? Personally, I don't want a quota. I want a freedom. And some people start hoarding goods. Remember, some people were hoarding toilet paper during COVID even. And they start prioritizing personal gain. And then the state must enforce it. And there's that famous case, Wickard versus Filborn, even that happened in the United States during FDR, that you might want to look into, where a farmer grew some extra food for his family during the Depression, and the government penalized him for it. Real big problem, went to the Supreme Court. Consequences. Coercion escalates over time as resistance grows, and planners tighten control. So it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. I mean, look, read the Gulag Archipelago to see what happened in Russia. You got all that history there in that book, and I recommend this book as well. A lot of good books to read on how it has failed. Socialism has failed. Time and time and time again. Certain factions keep bringing it back. Collectivization of agriculture in the 1930s, Soviet Union. Ayn Rand came over from the Soviet Union, I think in about 1924, I believe, to Chicago and then New York. And she wrote Atlas Shrugged and some other good books on it, and wrote some good books as well. So there's another good book you can read. And collectivization, she talks about collectivism in her book, but how that is a failure and leads to mediocrity and all kinds of things. But let's stick with Hayek. So millions of farmers in prison, killed. Under Mao, you had the Great Leap Forward, I love these names. And they had to use coercive measures, and millions of people have starved and died and were killed under Mao. They were killed under Stalin. So what does Hayek say? Coercion is not a byproduct of it. It's not a byproduct of bad leadership. People always say if we just get the right guy, socialism will work this time. Have you heard that? Or it's just been done incorrectly. It's not a product of bad leadership. It's a bad system. Because even well-meaning planners must resort to force when their plans fail to align with what? What happens when you get out in the real world, or reality, whatever you want to call it. The real world is different than a theoretical design in your head. So that undermines society. So what happens? The more the state plans, according to Hayek, the more difficult planning becomes for the individual. And also, I would argue, for the businessman, right? For the business. And if the government can arbitrarily change things, write new rules, and has so much power, how are you going to know how to live your life and how to run your business? Stalin's collectivization in the 1930s, another example you can look into. Number 4, what does Hayek also say? There's going to be an erosion of democracy. We have a republic here in America, but it's an erosion of democracy. And Hayek warns that socialism's centralization of power weakens democratic institutions. While socialism is often advocated in the name of collective welfare, its reliance on planning concentrates authority in what? Small group of people, or what? Experts, right? Wilson loved his experts and bureaucrats, or bureaucrats, who remember COVID and all the bureaucrats and how wrong they were, who and what do they do? What do they make the priority? Their plans, their wants, their desires, not yours, over what? The public's will. So, what did Wilson complain about? He complained about the Constitution. It was getting in the way. What do bureaucrats sometimes complain about? The Constitution. Democratic processes, like voting or public debate, what happens with that? It's slow, it's messy, they don't like that. And it often produces what? Compromises that conflict with the kind of rigid plan that a socialist would need. Planners, bureaucrats too, Hayek's talking about planners here, believe their vision is superior. And that because of that, they know better than you, right? Only for thee, not for me. They manipulate democratic mechanisms to achieve their goals because they know best, right? They know best. They know better than you. And over time, the state sidelines elected bodies in favor of technocratic, we have that concern today, or authoritarian rule. And what does that do? And we're going to get to number 5, which is very important. That erodes democratic accountability. And Hayek goes into the rise of Nazi Germany. He saw it, where the Nazis kept taking more power, right? And socialist-inspired economic controls, though not Marxist, were used to what? Concentrate, centralize power. That's why the solution is decentralization. So people may be upset with the current system we have, but the answer is to decentralize, limit government, reduce government spending, not the opposite, put more controls on it. So democracy thrives on dispersed power. We have federalism here, thank goodness. What would COVID have been like without federalism? Think about it. States were pushing back and individual choice, but socialism centralizes power. And that creates a tension and an autocracy. And he talks about even democratic socialism risks that same outcome, as he saw in wartime Britain's heavy state controls, which he feared could persist. So to think about Cuba, how they were all trying to get here and what happened, they had elections, but they were symbolic. Britain had heavy controls, so I think you get it. Socialism can be put into practice only by methods which most socialists disapprove. Good line, right? 5, and important, and I think you see this today when all the guys are talking, they can't buy a house, there's no more opportunity here, can't get ahead, can't start a business, can't do this, can't. 5 is moral decline. And this is the last point. Socialism, by replacing voluntary cooperation with state mandates, what happens there? Well, I think it creates a hopelessness, but Hayek says it creates resentment and diminishes what? Personal responsibility. So you got a lot of people, I've heard it, this universal income's fine now because I'll never own a home anyway and I'll never get ahead. But the solution to owning a home and getting ahead is not more government, it's less government and getting the government out of your life and out of the private sector. Hayek argues that markets encourage mutual benefit through trade, while socialism's top-down approach breeds conflict and dependency. So in a market system, I go out to a cigar bar, we're cooperating, right? I'm choosing to buy that. The cigar bar is choosing to sell it to me. We're cooperating, we're voluntarily trading, right? The government's not telling me I have to go to a cigar store. How would you like to be told you have to go to a cigar store and smoke? I don't think you'd like it, right? Socialism substitutes with state directives. You're going to be told what to do and how to do it, where individuals are forced to act against your will and your interest, working maybe in assigned jobs or accepting ration goods are told what to eat. Hey, no more red meat, no cigars, no guns, no this, no that. We're going to control what you buy. Maybe the guy, a bureaucrat, has a friend in the government, so he wants you to buy their stuff, right? And then you get more and more corruption, right? The bigger the government gets, I think it leads to more corruption as well. And I think people sense that something not right is going on because our government is too big right now, and it's involved in too many areas of your life. So people will be less inclined to do, we talk about the virtues here a lot, taking the initiative as men and women, right? So you're going to be less inclined to what? Take the initiative, work hard if you feel it's hopeless. And I think the Hayek, Mises, Friedman would say the larger the government gets, you got a problem. Friedman talks about this as well, getting the ending agencies and getting the government out of your life. There's way too many regulations. So people become less inclined to what? Take the initiative and act ethically, Hayek says. And personal effort, it's not rewarded as much, right? You're the best guy at work, but there's a minimum wage law. They're probably not going to be able to reward you more. But if you were the best guy at work and a bunch of people were performing much more poorly than you, that owner might choose to give you a lot more money than the other guys, but because of minimum wage laws, really can't do that, right? So it might be punishing the top producer of the store. So in the Soviet Union, you had black markets that came up. So that doesn't really go well with morality, right? And the citizens would go around the state government anyway to meet their needs. So an extra market, a black market was created. So workers often, what's the incentive to work? If you can never get a home and you can never get ahead under socialism or communism, which you won't be able to do, what's the point of working hard? What's the point of working 50, 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week, giving up vacations, sacrificing too? What's the point of not traveling for years and maybe working very hard and dedicating yourself to your business for 10 years if the government's not going to let you make much money on it? Or dedicating yourself to that, getting 5 extra sales a month if it's the same pay? Well, you're not going to do it, right? And I've heard guys say this, what's the point of working hard now? You're never going to get ahead. So I think the bigger the government gets, and so we're misdiagnosing the problem. Problem is government intervention. All right, moral behavior depends on individuals having the freedom to make choices and bear the consequences. Let's stop there. Having the freedom to make choices and bear their consequences. So what happened? Government got involved in federal loans. We put up the tuition increased, and then now there's a lot of individuals that want the government to forgive that debt. That's not accountability, right? That's not bearing the consequences. So when you have too much government intervention and the government's picking winners and losers, whether that's a business, whether that's rewarding too big to fail, it can be companies that they do it to, whether it's subsidies for energy companies or whatever that is. What we want is getting the government out of your life so you can perform well. And so you can reach your potential, hit your talents, and whatever opportunity you're seeking, you have a better chance to get it. So socialism, removal of this freedom undermines virtues. And we talk about the virtues a lot. Honesty, diligence, generosity. What does it replace it with? And I see this and I hear it. I asked a guy in the Nashville group a couple of weeks ago, hey, any of your friends interested in any of this? Not really. They don't think there's much hope to ever buy a house or do anything. So what does it create? Apathy. I talk a lot about complacency. Or it could create opportunism. You could have corporate companies going to seek favors from the government, and it could work that way, instead of just the market determining what is valuable and you determining the price. The great advantage of the competitive order is that the market is that it makes coercion unnecessary. So let me read that again. The great advantage of the competitive order is that it makes coercion unnecessary. We don't want coercion, right? We don't want that. So Hayek argued that markets encourage voluntary cooperation. People trade for mutual benefit. And that fosters what? If you're making the choice to do it, you're going to probably take more responsibility for it. And it's going to foster what between you and the gentleman you're working with or lady? Trust, right? So you want trust and responsibility. So there's a moral piece to this. Socialism replaces that with state mandates. What do you think happens to your decision-making capability as well? So I think we got it most of the time. It talks about workers slacking off, knowing the effort didn't pay. I think we went into that. And it's a tragic loss of the virtues. And what do virtues do? They hold societies together, right? Planners' discretionary authority leads to unequal treatment and favoritism. I think that's what people notice today, and it makes them believe the system's completely broken. So he also goes in the book about how it stifles innovation. So it discourages individual initiative and competition. One more thing, he says it's a path to totalitarianism. A lot of people looking at socialism. Hayek doesn't think that's the answer. Friedman wouldn't, Mises doesn't, and I don't either. So for more freedom, we don't want to move toward more centralization. We want to move away from it, and we want to look to history to show that it hasn't worked. Socialism never worked. And you can look at all those countries we went through. Look at Venezuela just recently. So you want to move away from big government and government intervention. You want to have a government that spends less. You want to have state governments that create less regulations and spend less. So making state governments smaller and more limited, making the federal government smaller and more limited. Take a look at HUD, take a look at FEMA. Take a look at what's going on with housing. The guy in Orange County talks about regulations in HUD. So agencies as well is a problem for housing. So there you go. Thanks. If you like this subject, please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you.